At first, it seemed like just another common subway scuffle, until that man's teeth sank deep into the girl's neck. The immediate thought was that the man must be incredibly drunk, a reasonable assumption under the circumstances. A young man, wearing headphones, quickly raised his phone to focus on the unfolding scene. He moved fast, thinking only of how this moment could easily go viral and become a trend. Beside him, his girlfriend stood on her tiptoes, trying to get a better look at the commotion. The bitten girl let out a sharp scream, but inside the noisy subway car, the sound was lost. The cry was quickly drowned out. Most passengers remained glued to their phones, oblivious to the horror. Only those standing closest to the struggle began to feel a sense of growing unease. An elderly woman, wondering if the man was truly ill, began hitting the attacker with her handbag. It was unsettling. Everything about today felt unsettling. Through the gaps in the crowd, we see the truth. The man hadn't moved. He was still locked in that terrifying biting posture. He wore a wrinkled white shirt, looking like any ordinary office worker, but his eyes told a different story. His pupils were blown wide, and the whites of his eyes were webbed with thick, red veins. They looked like the eyes of a dead fish. Someone shouted for the crowd to pull them apart. Finally, a burly man stepped forward and lunged toward the pair to intervene. He tried to pull the attacker away, but the moment his hand touched the white shirt man's shoulder, things changed. A mutation occurred. The bitten girl suddenly stopped struggling, her body going eerily still for a heartbeat. Then, she began to convulse violently, her limbs twisting into agonizing and completely unnatural angles. The sound of grinding bones was enough to make anyone's skin crawl. It was a sound no one should ever hear. The young man who had been recording felt his voice begin to tremble as he wondered what was happening to her. The girl's convulsions suddenly ceased, and then she slowly lifted her head. She now had those same dead fish eyes as the man. A second later, she lunged. She threw herself at the nearest elderly woman, and the entire subway car erupted into chaos. People began to scream, begging for the doors to open so they could escape the nightmare. The crowd surged toward both ends of the car, moving like an overflowing flood. Our young man was crushed against the door, the pressure nearly breaking his ribs. The young couple from before had already been swept away and separated by the frantic current. The girl's scream echoed from somewhere in the distance, only to be cut short abruptly. The glass of the windows was quickly covered in frantic handprints and thick condensation. Someone hammered on the emergency button, but the train kept roaring through the tunnel, doors sealed shut. He struggled to turn his head to see the car, and the scene was an absolute disaster. The two infected, we'll call them that for now, as no other word fits, were relentless. They were tearing into the eyes and throats of the fallen passengers. Blood splashed across the white walls of the car, looking like a piece of macabre modern art. The worst part was that those who were bitten quickly transformed into new attackers themselves. Someone screamed for everyone to run toward the rear car to find safety. Those words acted like a signal, sparking a desperate, renewed surge of movement. Everyone began to huddle and push frantically toward the narrow connection between the cars. In the shoving and trampling, an old man was knocked down and instantly stepped on by dozens of feet. His reading glasses shattered, and the sharp fragments dug deep into his cheek. But no one stopped to help, not even our young man, who was swept along by the crowd. Survival instinct had taken complete control, overriding every other human impulse. Dragged by the human current, he managed to cross through the first connecting door. His feet stepped on something soft. He looked down and saw a small pink teddy bear, lying next to a tiny Hello Kitty backpack. To be honest, he didn't dare imagine where the owner was. The second car was slightly better, but panic had already spread faster than any physical virus. An office worker was sobbing into her phone, screaming that someone had gone mad and was biting people. She claimed there were many of them, perhaps over 100, and she desperately needed to report it. They were on subway line 10, heading west, trapped in a nightmare on rails. She kept repeating that passengers were being attacked, but the person on the other end seemed confused. She snapped, asking if they really wanted her to speak slower while she was about to die. He pulled out his own phone. The battery was at 12%, and the signal was flickering in and out. His messaging app showed nothing but a spinning loading circle, a frustrating sight in such a moment. Behind them, the sound of shattering glass echoed. The infected were catching up to them. Someone yelled to keep running back. They fled from the second car to the third, and then from the third to the fourth. At every door, someone else seemed to lose their mind. People were left behind to the sound of fresh screams. Suddenly, the subway intercom crackled to life. The voice announced that due to an unexpected situation, the train would make a temporary stop at the next station. The recording urged them to remain calm, a request that, in this chaos, felt like a cruel joke. Finally, they reached the very last car. There was nowhere left to run. Block the door. Quickly, block the door. A man wearing glasses grabbed another passenger's suitcase without asking. He shoved it into the aisle, but outside the glass door, 7 or 8 people were pounding desperately. What are you doing? They're going to catch us. My son is still in there. A terrible, heavy silence fell over the subway car. Let them in. A young woman suddenly stood up. She wore her hair in a ponytail. Her face was pale, but her gaze remained firm. Those are living people out there, not those monsters. Is that a lie? The man with the glasses, still blocking the door, shouted back. Who knows if they've been bitten? If even one infected person gets in, we are all dead. We can't just let them die either. Arguments broke out. If you want to save someone, go out there and save them yourself. The screams outside were intensifying, and the pounding on the door grew more urgent. Our young man saw a woman outside, clutching a child in her arms. The child was unconscious. It was impossible to tell if he was alive or dead. The woman's eyes were filled with a pure, raw desperation. Damn it, he remembered the Hello Kitty backpack he had stepped on earlier. At the very least, we should. But as soon as he spoke, the man with glasses glared at him with fury. You want to play the hero? He pointed toward the glass. Look closely. The infected are already there. And indeed, several figures suddenly appeared at the far end of the hallway. Their movements were stiff, their clothes and hair matted with blood, and their faces were unrecognizable. Seeing them, the people trapped outside became even more desperate to get in. One man, driven by pure terror, actually began to bang his head against the door. He begged them to save him, crying out that he didn't want to die. As they pleaded for their lives, the man with the glasses let out a cold, mocking laugh. He asked why they were begging now, when they hadn't bothered to wait for anyone else earlier. Just then, we see the woman outside suddenly freeze and go completely still. She lowered her head to look at her arm, where her sleeve had been torn away, revealing a clear, unmistakable row of deep teeth marks on her skin. Her desperation reached a breaking point as she realized she had been bitten. Someone inside the car gasped. It was exactly what the man with glasses had feared. In fact, his voice now carried a strange, dark tone of satisfaction. He reminded everyone why he refused to open the door, while the woman looked at her child, tears falling in heavy droplets as she slowly lifted the boy up toward the glass. She pressed him against the door, pleading with them to at least save her son. But the boy had been bitten too. He woke up and began to cry out in pain. The young woman with the ponytail couldn't take it anymore and rushed toward the door. The man with glasses grabbed her arm to stop her, and as the two of them struggled, another young man took advantage of the chaos to finally force the door open. And just like that, he managed to force a small gap in the door, only a tiny opening. But it changed everything. The people outside, driven by madness, began to shove their way in. The woman struggled to pass her child inside, while others fought to enter and save themselves. Voices screamed to close the door quickly, as the entire scene spiraled completely out of control. Some managed to squeeze through, while others were left trapped between the sliding doors. The woman with the child was knocked down, and the boy flew from her arms, hitting the floor hard. The child's crying stopped instantly. The infected had finally reached them. Heart-wrenching screams echoed from outside. Blood splattered against the glass door and began to seep through. It leaked through the cracks into the car. Everyone inside pushed against the door with all their might. Their hands were soon covered in blood, though no one knew whose blood it actually was. The people who had been arguing just moments ago were now sitting on the floor in shock. The young woman with the ponytail sat trembling, still clutching her knees to her chest. The man with glasses leaned in a corner, obsessively wiping the bloodstains from his hands. Someone whispered under their breath that this was all their fault. But no one offered a response, because deep down, they all knew the truth. In a situation like this, every one of them was both a killer and a victim at the same time. The subway train continued to hurtle forward, with no one knowing where it was actually going. The signal light in the car flickered rhythmically, looking very much like a countdown to the end. The young man pulled out his phone. The battery was at 5%. He opened his messaging app and sent one final text to his mother. He wrote, "Mom, I might not be able to come back." The message was sent, but no reply ever came. Beside him, we see the true face of panic. Someone gasping for air, someone praying, someone calling home. "Hey honey, can you hear me?" A voice called out over the din. It was a middle-aged man, bald and frantic, shouting desperately into his phone. "I love you, remember that. I love you, son," he managed to say before the line failed. The call cut off abruptly. He stared at the black screen, his shoulders shaking violently, and who could blame him? Our protagonist opened his social media feed, desperate to understand the nightmare unfolding outside. The top trending topic was impossible to ignore, a mass-biting incident in the city subway system. He scrolled through endless videos. It wasn't just their train. The entire network seemed to be collapsing. Deep down, he knew they were in serious trouble. The comment sections were spiraling into pure madness. "This is a zombie outbreak, isn't it?" one post asked, while others dismissed it as a sick joke. Another user reported that their friend on line 3 had already gone completely silent. The warnings were clear. Get home immediately, because the streets were now crawling with the insane. Then, his battery finally gave up. The screen went dark, leaving him in a digital void. A moment later, the subway train finally began to lose its frantic momentum and slow down. The announcement for the next station rang out, a familiar sound that now felt strangely sinister. The train came to a heavy halt, and with a mechanical hiss, the doors slid open. Chaos reigned on the platform. The man with glasses screamed for no one to leave, but he was too late. The moment the doors opened, the passengers poured out like water bursting through a broken dam. He was swept up in the human current, stumbling onto the platform as the world around him dissolved. The scene on the platform left our protagonist completely stunned. He wondered if this was truly the same station where he commuted every single day. Bags, shoes, and food containers were scattered everywhere across the floor. The vending machine had been toppled over, its drinks spilling out across the tiles. The walls and the ground were covered in dark, unmistakable bloodstains. And the worst part was that many infected were wandering the platform with stiff, rigid movements. They moved like puppets, walking aimlessly back and forth across the station. The moment they saw someone exit the train, they lunged like sharks catching the scent of blood. Voices screamed to run and avoid the exits as the crowd descended back into pure chaos. He ran desperately toward the security checkpoint, but suddenly, he felt himself slip. He stepped on something horribly sticky and nearly lost his balance entirely. Looking down, he realized it was a pool of semi-coagulated blood. He couldn't think or look back. His only instinct now was to keep running. The stairs were packed with people, and when someone fell, those behind simply trampled over them. One person tried to help the fallen man, but they ended up tripping as well. Screams, cries, and desperate curses all blurred together into a single wall of noise. Then, we see the girl with the ponytail again, squeezed tightly within the frantic crowd. She was pale, her gaze lost, as someone beside her shoved her aside. She stumbled a few steps, clearly on the very verge of falling down. Acting on pure instinct, he reached out and grabbed her by the arm. She whispered a thank you, her voice so faint it was almost inaudible. He told her not to speak, and to just follow him as he took her firmly by the hand. They pushed up the edge of the stairs, his palms so sweaty he could barely keep his grip. Screams echoed from behind them, a grim reminder that the infected were closing in. He urged her to move faster until, finally, they reached the surface. Now, the nights in this city are usually bright and full of life. But not tonight. Instead, they found crashed cars, one of them still smoldering with thick smoke. The streetlights flickered overhead, looking as if they might give out at any moment. In the distance, the air was filled with the sound of sirens, screams, and sudden explosions. The entire city had descended into madness, leaving them wondering which way they should even run. The girl with the ponytail asked the question between heavy, ragged breaths. He looked around and saw that the streets were completely choked with abandoned cars. Some sat with their doors wide open, eerily empty in the middle of the road. On the sidewalks, we see a desperate blur of people running and others giving chase. It was impossible to tell who was still healthy and who had already been infected. He decided their first priority had to be finding a safe place to hide. They ran east down the main avenue, eventually passing by a small convenience store. The glass door was shattered, and the interior was a scene of total devastation. Inside, several people were violently fighting over the last few supplies left on the shelves. They shouted over a bottle of water, claiming they had found it first, a sad display of desperation. Two men were brawling over a single crate, until one of them snatched a heavy glass bottle. He grabbed it from the shelf and brought it down with sickening force on the other man's head. Blood splattered across the floor as the fallen man convulsed briefly before going completely still. The attacker stood frozen for a few seconds, then grabbed the water and fled into the night. It is truly chilling how easily the thin veil of civilization can be torn apart. He told the girl not to look anymore, urging her that they had to keep moving. He took her firmly by the hand again, and together they continued their desperate run. They ran for another 10 minutes, until his lungs felt as though they were about to burst. The girl with the ponytail was in even worse shape, leaning heavily against a roadside railing. She coughed violently, her body finally signaling that she couldn't take another step. Deep down, he knew he was at his limit too. He simply couldn't run any further. The surge of adrenaline that had carried them this far was finally beginning to fade. Fear and exhaustion began to wash over him like an unstoppable tide. He realized they absolutely had to find a place to rest, and quickly. Just ahead, we see a residential complex with its main gate firmly shut. The security booth sat in total darkness, offering no sign of welcome. It was impossible to tell if anyone was inside as they hurried toward the entrance. They reached the iron gate only to find it was securely locked. The side door was also bolted shut, leaving them to wonder if anyone was actually there. He pounded on the security booth window, desperately pleading for someone to let them in. There was no response, only the sound of heavy, dragging footsteps approaching from behind. He turned around and saw several infected figures stumbling toward them through the gloom. They were closing in fast, and he knew he had to find a solution immediately. The girl with the ponytail spoke through her tears, her voice trembling with pure terror. He glanced at the main gate and then at the side wall, weighing their desperate options. The wall was over 6 feet high and topped with jagged glass shards, a nasty deterrent in normal times. He told her she had to climb, ignoring her protests that she was terrified of heights. He went up first, pulling himself up to sit astride the wall despite the sharp glass. He reached down to help her, but her hands were shaking so violently she couldn't catch his grip. Meanwhile, the infected were drawing closer with every passing second. He urged her to hurry, and finally, closing her eyes, she began to scramble up using every bit of strength. He pulled her upward with everything he had, feeling the muscles in his arms begin to burn. Finally, he got her to the top and told her to jump before leaping down himself. He hit the ground hard, unable to keep his balance as he landed in the shadows. A sharp, stinging pain flared in his right ankle, a stroke of truly terrible luck. The girl remained perched on the wall, frozen and unable to bring herself to make the leap. He hissed for her to jump as the monsters arrived. She gritted her teeth and finally plummeted. He forced himself up to catch her, and the impact sent them both sprawling to the pavement. From the other side of the wall, the guttural snarls of the infected filled the air. We hear the sickening sound of fingernails scratching desperately against the iron gate. Your foot, she whispered, noticing immediately as he began to limp. It's fine, I can walk, he replied, gritting his teeth against the sharp pain. The neighborhood was eerily silent, the streetlights still glowing, yet not a soul was in sight. We see them find a building nearby with the main entrance standing slightly ajar. They pushed it open and stepped inside, finding the hallway swallowed by complete darkness. Is anyone there? He asked softly, his voice echoing hollowly down the corridor. Using his phone's flashlight was no longer an option, the battery was simply gone. So they climbed the stairs blindly. There was something sticky on the steps, though he couldn't see what. He didn't dare think about it. Upon reaching the third floor, they spotted an open door. It's a model apartment, the girl with the ponytail noted, her voice barely a breath. She was right. A small sign still hung on the door marking it as a showroom for visitors. They slipped inside and closed the door quickly, finding the space filled with simple furniture. But these pieces were clearly just for display, a hollow imitation of a home. The sofa was coated in a thick layer of dust, suggesting no one had visited in quite some time. He hobbled over to the window and carefully pulled the curtain back just a fraction. Looking down at the neighborhood path below, he saw several figures wandering aimlessly. From this height, it was impossible to tell if they were survivors or the infected. On the city's horizon, several fires were already beginning to lick at the night sky. What do we do now? The girl asked, sitting on the dusty sofa and hugging her knees. He didn't know. With his phone dead, he was completely cut off from the rest of the world. The world outside had already descended into absolute chaos. They were like two hamsters trapped in a cage, with no idea what was waiting for them out there. He decided their first priority should be to see if there was anything useful in the apartment. We see them begin to search the room, eventually finding a display refrigerator in the kitchen. Upon opening it, much to their surprise, they found 3 bottles of mineral water. There were also 2 apples, likely left behind by previous visitors, as the girl suggested. 3 bottles of water and 2 apples. That was the extent of their entire supply. Fortunately, the living room curtains were quite thick. They took them down to use as blankets and grabbed sofa cushions to serve as makeshift pillows. My name is Lily, the girl said suddenly, breaking the heavy silence. He introduced himself as Leo, and after that brief introduction, they sat together. They didn't fall into silence, however, as the sounds from outside, the screams, never stopped. There were explosions and the distant, rhythmic roar of helicopters. Every sound served as a grim reminder that the world outside was no longer safe. Hey, what do you think is actually happening? Lily asked in a low, trembling voice. Leo simply shook his head. He didn't know. Was it a virus? Biological weapons? Or perhaps zombies? She continued to list the terrifying possibilities. They're zombies, aren't they? Just like in the movies, she whispered. He didn't deny it, mostly because he couldn't think of any other explanation for the madness. We're going to die, she said, her voice shaking with a fear she could no longer hide. Leo looked at her, illuminated only by the faint light filtering through the window. He could see the raw fear in her eyes, and he told her no, they weren't going to die. Deep down, he didn't believe his own words, but he insisted the army and government would take control. Lily nodded, desperate to find even a shred of comfort in his obvious lie. As the night wore on, they decided to take turns keeping watch while the others slept. In reality, sleep was impossible. Every tiny sound from the hallway set their nerves on edge. Eventually, a strange silence fell, though the apartment was damp and the bathroom was filled with water. The toilet was dry, so he told her she would have to use a bucket. He managed to find an old paint bucket left over from the building's construction. Lily blushed deeply and awkwardly asked him if he could give her some privacy. He turned away and stepped out onto the balcony, where more fires had broken out below. The entire city looked like a giant torch burning uncontrollably into the night sky. He wondered if this was truly how the world ended, and by dawn, they were both exhausted. They leaned against the sofa and finally drifted into a heavy, restless sleep. A little later, a series of violent thuds against the door jolted them awake. Bang, bang, bang. The sudden noise forced them both upright in an instant. They stared at each other, their eyes wide and filled with a new kind of terror. The pounding stopped, followed by the chilling sound of the door handle slowly turning. The door was locked, of course, but it was only the cheap lock of a model apartment. It wasn't built for security, and as the handle kept turning, the situation became far more complicated. Leo motioned for her to stay silent as he crept toward the door to peer through the peephole. There was someone standing outside, or rather, it wasn't exactly a person anymore. The figure wore a security uniform, but half of its face had simply stopped moving. Its hand was rotting away, exposing white bone as it mechanically turned the door handle. It moved like a broken robot, and in that moment, Leo held his breath. He didn't dare to move for what felt like 5 minutes, or perhaps it was 5 hours. Time had lost all meaning, until finally, the creature gave up and shuffled away. Only then did our 2 survivors finally dare to take a deep breath. Lily asked in a trembling voice if that thing knew they were inside. He admitted he didn't know, leaning against the door with his clothes soaked in sweat. Perhaps it was just random, but they both knew they couldn't stay there forever. They couldn't count on being that lucky again. They had to leave. The sun eventually rose, though it brought very little in the way of hope. Through a crack in the curtain, we see more infected wandering aimlessly below the building. Occasionally, they would swarm toward a noise, only to scatter once again. Their water was running out, and Lily stared at their very last bottle of mineral water. The food was nearly gone too, just 2 apples, one for each of them. Now, with empty stomachs, they were beginning to feel the true weight of hunger. He told her they had to go out for supplies, and asked if he should be the one to go. As he spoke, she looked at him with her eyes wide in total disbelief. She asked if he was crazy, pointing out that there were simply too many of them out there. But those things were everywhere, and they both knew that staying meant a different kind of death. He fell silent, as we all knew that what he had said was the absolute truth. Without food or water, they simply wouldn't be able to hold out much longer. He then asked if there was any signal left on the phone. After a bit of searching, he found an outlet and discovered the electricity was still running. He charged the phone quickly, though the signal flickered in and out the moment he turned it on. Dozens of unread messages filled the screen, all of them sent during the chaos of the previous night. He whispered the word "Mom" under his breath, wondering where she could possibly be. The messages pleaded for him to come home quickly. His mother begged him to respond if he saw the message, praying for his safety. The last one was from 2 in the morning, explaining that his parents were trapped inside their house. It was far too dangerous outside, and they begged him not to leave his shelter. They told him that if he saw this, he must remember that survival was the only thing that mattered. His mother told him she loved him, and his eyes began to well up with tears. Lily was also staring at her own phone, her tears falling without end. She explained that her boyfriend had been working late the night before. Now his phone went unanswered. Every attempt to call resulted in a busy signal or total silence. It was impossible to connect, as the network was barely functioning at all. He opened a news app where the headline displayed a stark, urgent warning. The entire city had been placed under a state of maximum alert. Citizens were instructed not to leave their homes and to wait for rescue where they were. The news reports that followed were even more disheartening, to say the least. Reports were coming in of attacks from unknown causes in multiple locations across the region. Hospitals were completely overwhelmed, with the medical system sitting on the very brink of collapse. The army had already entered the city, and we see that they were attempting to establish safe zones. That last line gave them a flicker of hope, and Lily immediately asked where the safe zone was. He kept scrolling through the feed, searching for any specific location. Finally, he found it. A temporary safe zone had been established at Olympic Park. The announcement stated that citizens were permitted to make their way there on their own. They were warned to be careful, as Olympic Park was at least 15 kilometers away from their current position. In normal times, of course, that distance would be absolutely nothing. But now, they realized they would need to find a car, though how they would manage that was another matter. He asked the question aloud while his mind turned toward the possibilities of the underground garage. Lily turned pale at the thought, wondering if the infected would already be lurking down in the dark. He told her that if they didn't at least try, they would never truly know their chances. To be perfectly honest, he wasn't entirely sure of the plan himself. He knew the risks, but driving was still better than going on foot, so they began to prepare. He grabbed a mop handle to use as a makeshift weapon, while Lily took a knife from the kitchen. It was a somewhat ridiculous sight, perhaps, but it was certainly better than having nothing at all. He reminded her once more to remember his advice whenever she encountered those things. She was not to hesitate to run, and under no circumstances should she try to fight. They simply couldn't defeat them, and Lily nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. We see them open the door with extreme caution, finding the hallway in complete, eerie silence. They tiptoed their way downstairs, and as they reached the second floor, they noticed something. The muffled sound of a television drifted from a room, suggesting someone was still alive inside. But they didn't stop, passing a pool of dried blood on the floor of the first-floor lobby. The entrance to the underground garage was right there, just a few steps away. The heavy metal door was standing slightly ajar, which was never a particularly good sign. Everything inside was pitch black, and Lily pulled at his sleeve, whispering that they should turn back. He swallowed hard, telling her that they had already come too far to give up now. He pushed the door open, and a wave of putrid decay immediately hit him in the face. He nearly gagged, but they used their phone flashlights to cut through the oppressive darkness. They began their descent down the ramp, making sure every single step was carefully placed. They were terrified of waking something up in that massive garage filled with rows of silent cars. Lily pointed in a low voice toward a white Audi that had its driver's side door wide open. They hurried toward it and found the keys still in the ignition, a stroke of luck, it seemed. But the moment he opened the door fully, a lifeless body rolled out onto the concrete. It was a middle-aged man, bearing a very clear and gruesome bite mark on his neck. Lily let out a sharp cry and covered her mouth instantly, but the damage was already done. From the dark depths of the garage, a low, guttural growl rose up in response. He told her to get in the car, while he quickly dragged the lifeless body away. At that moment, there was no other choice. They had to move fast. The car was clear, and for a brief second, it seemed they might actually make it out. Suddenly, the car was struck with a heavy thud as an infected creature appeared. It lunged onto the hood, staring directly at them with eyes that had lost all humanity. Its face was pressed against the windshield, leaving a smear of saliva and dark blood behind. Lily screamed in terror, and he reacted by jerking the steering wheel and slamming the brakes. The creature was sent flying. He told her to forget about it and just keep driving. They sped through the garage corridors, desperate to escape as the shadows seemed to close in. And there it was. The exit light finally appeared at the end of the tunnel. As they emerged from the underground garage, the bright morning sun momentarily blinded them. The street was in even worse shape than the night before, littered with wrecked cars and bodies. Infected souls wandered aimlessly, and smoke still drifted from the shells of ruined buildings. The air was thick with the smell of smoke, and Lily asked where they were going. She was clearly shaken, so he focused on trying to remember the safest route out. The plan was to take the third ring road and then head straight toward the north. But as we know, saying it is easy, while doing it is another matter entirely. Abandoned cars blocked the road everywhere, making some paths completely impassable. Our only choice was to detour, forcing our way through the narrow back alleys. Watch out, an infected creature suddenly lunged from the edge of the road. He jerked the steering wheel sharply, and the car scraped harshly against the wall. The rearview mirror snapped right off. A minor loss, all things considered. Lily blamed herself, thinking she should have been watching the road more closely. He told her it wasn't her fault and focused all his concentration on the driving. He asked her to check the navigation, as the phone's GPS was surprisingly still working. But as we see, the screen was a sea of red, showing massive traffic jams everywhere. They had to take it slow, and 20 minutes later, the low fuel light flickered on. He cursed under his breath. They absolutely had to find a gas station now. The nearest one was 2 kilometers away, a short distance that felt like a marathon. When they finally arrived, it was clear the station had already been looted. The shop windows were shattered and the shelves had been completely overturned. Several bodies lay scattered across the ground. He wondered if the pumps even worked. Lily asked about the hoses, so he stepped out of the car to check them. The hose was functional, but someone needed to manually operate the pump from inside. He turned to Lily and asked if she knew how to drive. She admitted she knew a little, but wasn't very good. He told her to listen closely. He handed her the keys, explaining he had to go inside to turn on the pump. He told her that if danger appeared, she was to take the car and leave immediately. He told her not to wait, but she insisted she would never abandon him. He looked at her seriously and told her to listen. The most important thing was to survive. Lily bit her lip and took the keys while he grabbed a mop handle and cautiously entered the shop. Everything was a mess, but behind the counter, he managed to find the pump's control panel. Fortunately, the power was still on, so he studied the buttons and pressed the start switch. With the system active, he shouted for Lily to start filling the tank immediately. He took a moment to search the store and found several bottles of water. He also grabbed some cookies and 2 power banks, just as he was preparing to leave. Suddenly, he heard Lily's screams and ran out to see several infected approaching from across the street. Panicked, Lily fumbled with the hose and finally managed to pull it out of the car. He tossed the supplies into the back seat and quickly pushed her into the passenger side. He took the wheel himself, and the engine roared to life just in time. The infected were dangerously close as they sped away from the gas station. The road ahead became slightly easier, perhaps because they were finally leaving the city center. We see fewer infected here, but as is often the case, a new problem soon emerged. The entrance to the highway was completely blocked by a massive military truck. Behind the makeshift barrier, several armed soldiers stood watch, their weapons at the ready. A voice boomed over a loudspeaker, ordering them to stop and exit the vehicle for inspection. The two of them shared a look of pure relief. The nightmare seemed to be pausing. They had finally found the army, and he slowly let the car roll forward toward the checkpoint. He brought the car to a halt exactly where directed, and a soldier began to approach. The order was clear: get out and put your hands up. Naturally, they obeyed without a second thought. Another soldier approached carrying a handheld device and began to scan them both. Their temperatures were normal, but the soldier still asked if either of them had been bitten or scratched. They answered honestly that they hadn't, but the soldier insisted they roll up their sleeves for a physical check. Although the process felt a bit invasive, they did exactly as they were told. After confirming there were no hidden wounds, the soldier's stern demeanor finally began to soften. When asked where they were headed, Jake explained they were trying to reach the Olympic Park safe zone. The soldier simply shook his head, delivering the news that the park was already at full capacity. He informed them that the temporary safe zone had been relocated to a place called Suinji. They were told to keep heading straight down this road for about 20 kilometers. Lily's voice trembled slightly as she repeated the word full, her hope wavering for a moment. The soldier explained that too many people had arrived the night before, leaving the facility completely overwhelmed. He tried to reassure them, promising that Suinji had plenty of supplies and was well guarded. With no other options left on the table, they had no choice but to trust his word. As they moved to leave, the soldier suddenly called out for them to wait. He reached into the truck and pulled out 2 bottles of water and some military-grade crackers for them. He warned them to be careful, noting that the infected are easily drawn to bright lights. He told them not to turn on their headlights at night, a grim reminder of how much things had changed. There was nothing else to be done. Those who are bitten simply mutate, and the cycle continues. The soldier's expression was complicated, filled with a weariness that told its own story. He reminded them to remember that those things are no longer human if they happen to encounter one. They were told not to hesitate. They simply nodded and returned to the car. As they left the checkpoint, Lily asked if he truly believed a safe place actually existed. Jake gripped the steering wheel, insisting there was, though deep down, he wasn't so sure. The world had changed with terrifying speed, only yesterday at this very hour. His biggest worry had been a simple project deadline. Now, survival had become the only objective left. The car continued forward while the radio emitted a series of broken sounds. Through the static, a voice urged them to stay calm, claiming the army was in the safe zone. It instructed all survivors to head toward a specific location. The signal was poor, however, and the full message never quite made it through. The road became increasingly difficult to navigate, not because of traffic, but because of the bodies. They lay scattered across the highway, and some of them were still moving. He forced himself to keep driving, trying not to think about the sounds beneath the tires. Lily sat there pale, her hands white-knuckled as she gripped the handle. Jake asked her if she wanted to stop and rest for a moment. She simply shook her head and told him to keep driving. She claimed to be fine, but he could see she was reaching her absolute limit. He felt the same way, as his own adrenaline had long since run dry. At this point, the only thing sustaining them was pure survival instinct. Up ahead, a sign for a service area appears through the gloom. He suggests they rest there for just 10 minutes, a brief moment to breathe. Lily doesn't object this time, and we see the service area looks completely abandoned. A few scattered cars sit in the parking lot, but there isn't a soul in sight. They park carefully and step out, keeping their guard up as they move. The car stands alone while the service area door hangs open, revealing a dark interior. Lily asks if they should go inside, but Jake simply shakes his head. He decides it's safer to rest in the car, so they climb back in and lock the doors. Lily opens a pack of crackers and shares half with him, a small gesture of normalcy. She suddenly thanks him, and when he asks why, her voice trembles slightly. She thanks him for saving her back in the subway, knowing what might have happened otherwise. He quickly interrupts her, not wanting to dwell on those dark possibilities. Both of them are still alive, and for now, that is enough. He offers a smile, a forced, weary thing. She asks if he thinks her boyfriend is still alive, leaving Jake unsure how to respond. Of course he is, he finally says, choosing a white lie over the grim truth. She nods with tears in her eyes, and they sit there together in a heavy silence, eating dry crackers and drinking lukewarm water while the world falls apart outside. Outside, the sun begins to set, casting a bloody glow over the abandoned service station. It feels like a sunset song for the world they once knew. It's time to go. They had rested for half an hour, and now the sky is finally growing dark. Remembering the soldier's warning, we know they must find a safe place before night truly falls. Just as they start the engine, the car begins to pull away from the curb slowly. As they reach the exit of the service area, we see a solitary figure moving in the shadows. Jake slows down and approaches with caution, realizing it is indeed a living person. A large man in a filthy hiking jacket is desperately pushing a cart full of supplies. When he spots our duo's car, he freezes in shock before waving his hands frantically. He begs for help, and while Jake hesitates, Lily tells him not to stop. He wonders if it's a trap, but the man has already abandoned his cart and is running toward them. Suddenly, several infected burst out from behind the service building, right on his heels. The man screams for them to save him, and Jake realizes he can't just leave him there. He figures that since the man was clinging to his supplies, he likely isn't looking to cause trouble. Jake stops the car and rolls down the window, shouting for the man to get in quickly. The man practically rolls inside as he flings the back door open, gasping out his thanks. He was nearly finished, but Jake hits the gas, and the car roars out of the service area. In the rearview mirror, we see the infected still chasing, but they are soon left behind. Jake asks for his name, and the man, wiping away sweat, introduces himself as Wayne. He calls them good people, noting how rare it is to find anyone willing to save a stranger. Lily turns around to ask if he's alone, and Wayne nods sadly. He explains that he had a partner, but an hour ago, while searching for food, his friend was bitten. A heavy silence fills the car until Wayne asks if they are heading toward the safe zone. Wayne grew excited, explaining that he too was heading that way after hearing about a safe zone on the radio. He had been traveling on an electric motorcycle, but the battery died, leaving him stranded. Jake then asked what he did for a living. Wayne admitted he was a food delivery driver, feeling a sudden wave of embarrassment as he spoke. He told them not to look down on him, defending his profession by noting he knew this entire area like the back of his hand. Wayne let out a small chuckle, and we see the tension in the car begin to ease just a little. By the way, Wayne pulled a few chocolate bars from his pocket and offered them to the group. He had found them back at the service area. To be honest, while the big guy didn't look reliable, he seemed sincere enough. The night soon turned pitch black. Following the soldier's earlier advice, Jake decided to turn off the headlights. He drove using only the faint glow of the moon. They were moving slowly, but in this world, safety comes first. Lily suddenly pointed toward the horizon, noting that there appeared to be a fire up ahead. Indeed, the sky was beginning to glow with an ominous, flickering light. It was a sight that suggested the chaos had reached a massive scale, affecting millions as the world they knew crumbled. The air was filled with strange, echoing sounds that seemed to vibrate through the very frame of the car. As they continued forward, they reached the outskirts of the city, where the wind began to howl through the empty streets. Everything seemed to have been erased by the encroaching darkness. The wind carried the scent of smoke and something far worse across their path. Lily suddenly screamed for him to go back, realizing the road ahead was completely blocked. Jake slammed the car into reverse, but more infected had already appeared behind them, cutting off their escape. They were completely surrounded. Their only choice now was to get out and run for their lives. We see them abandon the car and break into a desperate run, with the infected closing in from every direction under the pale moonlight. Wayne pointed toward the edge of the fields, shouting for everyone to follow him. They scrambled through the crops, stumbling and tripping as they tried to find their footing. The ground was soft and treacherous, making every single step a grueling struggle. Lily suddenly collapsed, but Jake and Wayne quickly hauled her up between them and kept moving. Despite their efforts, the infected were gaining ground, drawing closer with every passing second. Just as Jake felt certain they were about to meet their end, the sharp crack of gunfire echoed from up ahead. With a rhythmic series of shots, several of the creatures were dropped instantly to the dirt. A flashlight beam cut through the dark, and a voice called out, demanding to know if they were human. Jake shouted back that they were indeed human, and the stranger told them to follow him immediately. A man emerged from the shadows at the edge of the field to meet them. In the moonlight, we can see that he is wearing a full set of camouflage fatigues. They followed him at a sprint, noticing that his movements were remarkably professional and controlled. Even while running, he fired backward with clinical precision, and every single shot found its mark. He was aiming for the heads and legs of the infected, slowing the pursuit with expert efficiency. He ordered them to get in, pointing toward a military jeep parked right at the edge of the road. They piled into the vehicle, and the soldier jumped into the driver's seat, slamming his foot onto the accelerator. Jake managed to gasp out a word of thanks, his chest heaving from the exertion. The man replied without even looking back, his eyes fixed firmly on the road ahead. He simply noted that they were all survivors now, and in this world, they had to help one another. His voice was remarkably calm, as if he had seen this kind of nightmare many times before. Lily asked if he was military, and the man briefly replied that he was a veteran. He explained that he was now working as a volunteer for the safe zone. He had been out searching for supplies when he found them, so they asked how much further the safe zone was. It was only about 10 kilometers away, and hearing this, everyone felt a massive wave of relief. The man introduced himself as Leo, finally giving a name to their savior. He asked for their names in return, and they introduced themselves one by one. Leo told them they were lucky, as almost no one dared to venture out at night. Those creatures, as it turned out, were far more active under the cover of darkness. They hadn't known that, of course, but they were alive, and that was all that mattered. Leo glanced through the rearview mirror, asking if any of them had been injured. They told him no, which was fortunate, as the safe zone conducted very strict inspections. Any wound meant immediate quarantine, a grim reality as the car sped through the night. Leo was an excellent driver. Even without the headlights on, he moved with total confidence. He navigated the road with clinical precision, dodging every obstacle in their path. When asked about the state of the safe zone, Leo curtly replied that the network was still functioning. There was food and water available, but the place was becoming incredibly crowded. The census yesterday counted over 30,000 people, a staggering number for a temporary camp. By today, that number was surely higher, making the safe zone feel smaller by the hour. It was a lot of people to manage, and then Leo suddenly asked if they had any family left. The question plunged the car back into a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Finally, Alex spoke up, admitting they had lost contact with their loved ones. Leo nodded and didn't press the matter further, leaving them to their quiet thoughts. In this new world, losing contact was practically a final goodbye, and they all knew it. Suddenly, lights appeared ahead, revealing an area heavily fortified with barbed wire. Searchlights swept the perimeter while armored vehicles and armed soldiers guarded the entrance. Leo announced they had arrived, and we see their hearts begin to race with anticipation. They wondered if they were finally safe, if this was truly the end of the nightmare. The car came to a halt at the gate, and everyone stepped out into the night air. They were immediately subjected to a strict inspection, starting with temperature checks, followed by a thorough search for wounds and the recording of their personal data. "Welcome to the Sunny Valley Temporary Safe Zone," a voice announced. The soldier's face was a mask of cold professionalism, showing no emotion whatsoever. He informed them that someone would be along shortly to escort them to the quarantine area. They were reminded that the first 3 days were strictly for observation. Lily felt a surge of nerves when told not to wander around the quarantine zone. It was standard procedure, as Mike explained, to ensure no infected had slipped through. He told her to stay calm, insisting that the conditions here were perfect. A worker soon arrived to guide them, and we see the safe zone was larger than imagined. Rows of tents were lined up neatly along makeshift paths, looking organized despite being rudimentary. At the very least, there was order here, as we see many people lining up for supplies along the path. Others simply sat in front of their tents, staring blankly into the distance with hollow eyes. Every face they passed was a mask of exhaustion and lingering confusion. The worker pointed toward a separate area partitioned with plastic sheets, directing the newcomers where to go. Several people were already inside, with men and women separated into 2 large, designated tents. The worker explained that if no symptoms appeared after 3 days, they could move to the formal housing zone. Meals were served twice a day, strictly at 7 in the morning and 5 in the afternoon. He pointed out the water collection point and told them to find the guards if any problems arose. With those instructions, he left, leaving the four of them standing there unsure of their next move. Alex looked at the girl with the ponytail, realizing this was where they had to part ways. It was the rule. After all, men and women were required to sleep in separate quarters. He told Sarah, the police officer, that he would see her again in 3 days. As Sarah turned to leave, Alex watched her with a certain sense of nostalgia in his eyes. He told her to be careful, feeling an indescribable pang as he watched her disappear into the women's tent. They had been through so much together over the last 2 days, a lifetime's worth of trouble, really. Even though it had been a short time, he felt as though he had known her for years. Leo gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder, signaling that it was time for them to move on. The men's tent was incredibly crowded, with nothing but thin mats spread out across the hard ground. People were packed tightly together, and the air hung heavy with the smell of sweat and harsh disinfectant. They eventually found a corner to sit down in, wondering if everyone else here had also just arrived today. Leo asked the person sitting next to him, and the man simply looked at us and nodded. The man explained he arrived in the afternoon, and our group replied that they had just gotten there. "How lucky for you," the man said with a bitter, hollow smile. He had heard rumors that starting tomorrow, the safe zone would stop accepting new people entirely. The reason was simple: too many people and not nearly enough supplies to go around. This news weighed heavily on their spirits, for if even the safe zone wasn't secure, what was? Where else could they possibly go? As the night deepened, a chorus of snoring filled the tent. Alex found sleep impossible, his mind replaying the chaotic events of the last 2 days on a loop. He saw the screams, the absolute chaos on the platform, and the bodies left on the road. How could the world change so fast? He turned over and saw that Leo wasn't sleeping either. Leo asked him in a low whisper if he was having trouble sleeping. He told Alex it was normal, as everyone reacts this way the first time they experience such things. Alex was puzzled by that phrasing. The first time? It was a strange thing to say. Leo fell silent for a moment before mentioning his time back in the army. He had carried out special missions where he had seen scenes very similar to these. Similar? Alex wondered if this meant they weren't actually dealing with a virus at all. Leo interrupted him, stating it was something else entirely, though he couldn't provide more details. That vague response only left Alex more confused, wondering what could be worse than a plague. Leo told him not to think too much about it, which is always easier said than done. Just staying alive was enough for now. Yes, in this new world, surviving was plenty. But was just staying alive truly enough? On the second day of quarantine, we see him witness a living hell. And that isn't a metaphor. It was the real thing, unfolding right before his eyes. It began at 4 in the morning, when a sudden, violent commotion broke out just outside the tent. Someone screamed a desperate curse. They rushed out of the tent and saw flames rising toward the sky on the other side of the safe zone. On that second day of quarantine, he truly felt he was looking into the abyss. A sudden noise was heard. A chaotic uproar right outside their tent. A curse, shouted by someone in the dark. They scrambled out of the tent to see what was happening. In the heat of that second day of quarantine, he witnessed a scene of absolute horror. They hurried out of the tent as someone nearby screamed in terror. They emerged from the safety of the tent. On this second day of quarantine, the world seemed to be ending. They stepped out of the tent, and the nightmare began in earnest. Someone screamed a curse into the night. They rushed out of the tent to see what was happening. On this second day of quarantine, we see him witness a living hell. They scrambled out of the tent as a desperate shout echoed through the camp. They emerged from the safety of the tent. On this second day of quarantine, he saw the abyss. They left the tent as someone cursed, their voice cracking with fear. They hurried out of the tent. Another curse was shouted as they left their shelter behind. On the second day of quarantine, he witnessed pure horror. They stepped outside. Someone screamed. They left the tent, and another cry rang out as they moved forward. Voices were everywhere. He saw the nightmare unfolding. Was the safe zone not safe after all? One man shook his head, knowing that no place was truly safe anymore. This was the cost of bureaucracy, he thought, as the pounding on the door grew louder. Leo asked if there was a back door they could use. The logistics officer began to answer, but more heavy blows struck the door before he could finish. "There is no back way. We are surrounded. Let's get to the roof," Leo said with grim determination. The warehouse had a ladder leading to the rooftop. They climbed up, and from that height, they saw it. The full horror of the safe zone was laid bare. Everywhere they looked, there were flames and figures running. Gunshots, screams, and explosions blended into a symphony of chaos. What was once a sanctuary had been transformed into a slaughterhouse. "It's over. Everything is over." The registration clerk collapsed to the floor in despair. "Not yet," Leo said, refusing to give up. As he scanned the perimeter, he noticed a breach had opened in the east wall. They could escape there. But to reach that eastern gap, they would have to cross almost the entire safe zone. He had an idea. The logistics officer mentioned a transport truck in the warehouse, and, luckily, he had the keys. A vehicle would make things much easier. They headed down, but the infected had already broken through the main door and were wandering inside. They had to move fast. Leo took the lead, firing with clinical precision. We see them follow him, sprinting toward the garage where a military truck was parked. Everyone scrambled into the vehicle. The logistics team started the engine while the others climbed into the back. The truck roared to life as it surged out of the garage. Outside, the landscape was hellish. The infected were being run over without pause. Some tried to climb into the back, but they were knocked back with tools. Lily gripped his arm, her face pale. He told her they would make it out, but deep down, he didn't even believe himself. Finally, they approached the eastern breach, but it was absolutely swarming with the infected. Leo and the driver gritted their teeth and dared to push through, flooring the accelerator to the floor. The truck, like a furious beast, slammed directly into the mass of bodies. The violent impact jolted everyone inside. The doctor lost his footing and fell from the truck bed. It was too late for him. He was instantly devoured by the infected. The truck pushed through, but the engine was smoking and wouldn't last much longer. "There's a forest ahead," Leo ordered, and they drove inside until the vehicle finally died. We see them jump out and keep running. The safe zone behind them was completely submerged. The glow of the fire turned half the sky red. They ran until they could run no more. In a small clearing, they stopped to rest. 7 had escaped, but now only 6 remained. The logistics officer was Zach, and the registration clerk was Mary. "What do we do now?" Wayne asked breathlessly. No one offered an answer. To be honest, no one knew the answer. The safe zone was gone. They were once again lost like stray dogs. "Let's find a place to rest," Leo said. "We'll decide at dawn." They found a hiding spot in the woods. The boy leaned on him, still trembling. "I'm sorry," he whispered. He asked why the boy was apologizing. "If you hadn't saved me, maybe you would have escaped already." "Don't be silly," he said, taking the boy's hand. The boy looked at him with tears glistening in his eyes. Moonlight filtered through the leaves. In this mad world, they could only trust each other. "Listen," Leo said suddenly. "In the distance, we hear the sound of an engine, a convoy." The boy's heart filled with hope, but Leo shook his head. It didn't sound like a military vehicle at all. The convoy drew closer and closer through the gaps between the trees, and they waited to see who was approaching. "That isn't good," Leo muttered. Leo's expression was deadly serious as he watched the lights. Sometimes in the apocalypse, people are far more terrifying than the infected. The convoy soon came to a halt nearby. "Boss, the safe zone is gone," someone reported with a sense of grim satisfaction. A harsh voice rang out, complaining that those soldiers had been too strict. "Now, everything belongs to us. Get those supplies at dawn," the leader ordered. "And remember, kill the men, but keep the women alive." A lewd laugh echoed through the trees. We see the boy's hand begin to tremble. These people were indeed scarier than the monsters. Because the infected only want to eat you, but these men wanted something much worse. The convoy finally moved on. They hid in the woods for another hour just to be safe. "We can't stay here long," Leo whispered. "Those scavengers will surely return tomorrow." "Where do we go?" Zach asked. Leo thought for a moment before suggesting they head north. He had heard that in the city, there was a massive base run directly by the military. "How far is it?" "Over 100 kilometers. Everyone fell silent at the thought of the journey. In normal times, that distance is nothing. Now, every single kilometer could be their last. "Is there a better option?" Leo asked them. "No." "Then it's decided." It was certainly better than waiting here to die. The others nodded in grim agreement. They began to prepare, redistributing their meager supplies, so everyone carried their fair share. "Don't trust anyone on the road," Leo warned. "If you see people, hide. If you see vehicles, hide. Unless it is absolutely necessary, do not expose yourselves to anyone." At dawn, they set off, avoiding the main highway to travel through the dangerous backroads. We had been walking for about 2 hours when the town appeared ahead, and Leo suggested they circle around it. However, Sarah couldn't take another step. She simply couldn't walk anymore after what happened last night. She had twisted her ankle and had been enduring the pain in silence, so Leo decided they should rest for a while. They took shelter in an abandoned shop at the entrance of the town, a place that had already been completely looted. At the very least, it offered protection from the wind and rain. Leo announced he was going out to take a look. Leo's companion offered to go with him, but Leo told them to stay and rest instead. The experiences of the last 2 days had been far too cruel for her, a simple kindergarten teacher. He passed her the canteen so she could have some water, and she took it, drinking in small, hesitant sips. She asked if he truly believed they could make it to the city alive, and he answered with firm conviction that they could. She gave a bitter smile, telling him he was lying and that he didn't even believe his own words. He had no answer for that. She continued, saying she wasn't actually afraid of death, but rather filled with a quiet rage. There were so many things she hadn't done and so many words left unsaid. He told her not to think that way. Her voice began to break as she mentioned her boyfriend, explaining they had planned to get married this very year. He didn't know how to comfort her. At the end of the world, all words of comfort seemed empty and useless. He spoke softly, trying to find the right words, as her tears finally began to fall. He reached out and hugged her gently while she wept in silence. It was a rare moment of shared vulnerability. Suddenly, Leo's voice rang out from outside, urgently telling them to come out because he had found something. They ran outside to find Leo pointing into the distance, where a convoy of vehicles was approaching. Several cars were heading their way through clouds of dust. He told them to hide, but it was already far too late. The lead jeep screeched to a halt right in front of them, and several armed men jumped out. The men were all armed, shouting for no one to move as our group slowly raised their hands in surrender. The leader asked if they had escaped from the safe zone, and Leo nodded, confirming their desperate journey. When asked how the safe zone was faring, Leo's expression darkened as he admitted it was completely lost. The scarred leader remained silent for a moment before gesturing for his men to finally lower their weapons. Leo asked where they were headed, and the man replied they were making for the military district. The leader, whom we'll call Scar, smiled bitterly, explaining that the district had actually fallen 3 days ago. The news hit them like a physical blow, and Sarah cried out that it was supposed to be a fortress. Scar noted that the infected don't care about military rank, and once again, a heavy despair settled over them. Suddenly, Scar made an unexpected offer, inviting them to join his group at a shelter that was still safe. He examined them closely, deciding that they looked like decent people who might actually be useful to have around. He explained they needed more hands at the shelter, while Leo and Sarah exchanged a long, uncertain look. Scar assured them they weren't bandits, which offered a small amount of comfort as he asked for their decision. Leo eventually decided to trust him, and they were told to climb into one of the waiting vehicles. As the convoy started moving, the leader introduced himself as Charlie, a man who once ran a logistics company. Leo asked how many people were currently at the shelter, curious about the size of this new community. Charlie revealed there were over 30 survivors, all of whom had fled from various places to find safety. He laid out the simple rules: don't cause trouble, and everyone stays alive. A fair trade, all things considered. The shelter was located in an abandoned factory, a large space that was easy to defend and had its own water. They drove for over an hour, passing countless corpses and rusted vehicles that lined the desolate road. We see corpses and abandoned vehicles everywhere, with smoke still rising in some places. This world truly has become a wasteland. And so, we arrive. A series of massive warehouses appear, guarded by armed men standing watch at the entrance. Upon seeing the convoy, they swing the gates open, revealing a factory much larger than anyone had imagined. Several warehouses have been converted into living quarters, and in the central courtyard, we see people training. Others are busy organizing supplies. To be honest, it looks like a remarkably serious survivor camp. Old Charlie has returned. He hops down from the vehicle and gestures for our group to follow him. He introduces the newcomers to the crowd, and we see that these are all just ordinary people. Charlie explains they are from the Sunni safe zone, declaring that from now on, they are part of the family. Someone asks about the state of the safe zone, and when they hear it fell, gasps of horror ripple through the crowd. Charlie waves his hand, telling everyone to get back to work as a young man approaches the group. He tells them to follow him and leads the way toward one of the large warehouses. He explains that the men sleep here and the women over there, while Charlie watches them settle in. He seems to be waiting for something, perhaps gauging how well they will adapt to this new environment. The soldiers stand nearby, their presence a constant reminder that safety always comes with a price. Leo takes a look around the area, realizing that his life is about to change once again. Of course, joining a new community is never simple, and he knows they must prove their worth. He takes a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves as he looks at the faces of his companions. The atmosphere is heavy with the weight of everything they have lost to get here. A caretaker approaches them, offering a small gesture of welcome in this harsh, new world. It is late afternoon when Charlie finally leaves them to rest, the rain beginning to fall outside. He gives them one final warning: be careful, and whatever you do, do not act alone. He nods in understanding. When dinner time arrives, everyone gathers together in the dining hall. The meal is quite simple, just porridge with salted vegetables, but in the middle of an apocalypse. Having hot food is more than enough. As Leo eats, he takes a moment to observe the others. Most of the people have numb expressions, eating their food mechanically as if on autopilot. Only a few of them seem to maintain any sense of vigilance or awareness of their surroundings. Suddenly, a new voice rings out. Leo looks up and sees a tall, thin man standing there. The man introduces himself as Zach and takes a seat right next to Leo. He asks how long Leo has been here, and upon hearing he just arrived, Zach wishes him good luck. Zach lowers his voice, explaining that Charlie has many rules, but he isn't a bad person. He's certainly better than the animals outside, where things have become completely chaotic. Zach smiles with a touch of disdain, remarking that the world out there has become a living hell. He mentions seeing a group of people kill an entire family of 3 over a single box of instant noodles. Hearing this, Leo feels a tight knot form in his stomach. It's a grim reality to face. So, the advice is simple: behave yourself and stay here where it's relatively safe. Zach gives him a friendly pat on the shoulder, noting that just being alive is enough these days. After dinner is over, Charlie gathers all the newcomers together to address them. He tells them that their work begins tomorrow, and everyone is expected to contribute. Those who have experience with farming will be sent to work in the fields. Maya raises her hand, mentioning that she knows first aid and can help the wounded. Charlie nods in approval, deciding that she will be assigned to the medical team. As for the others, Liam spoke up, offering to train the newcomers for combat. Charlie nodded in agreement, noting that the plan sounded perfect. They truly needed someone with his skills, and so, we see them finally settling into the shelter. It wasn't exactly a long-term solution, but for the time being, they were safe. That night, Leo lay awake on the hard wooden boards of his bed. He listened to the wind howling outside, wondering just how long this sanctuary would last. Deep down, he couldn't help but wonder if there was any hope left for the world. But at least they were still alive, and for now, that had to be enough. On their 5th day at the shelter, an unexpected incident occurred. That morning, Leo was busy helping Liam repair some equipment. Suddenly, the sharp cry of the sentry rang out across the compound. Someone was approaching, and Charlie headed out with a small group to investigate. 10 minutes later, they returned, bringing 3 strangers back with them. Or rather, 2.5 people, as one was badly wounded and barely being held up. Charlie shouted for them to get the man to the medical clinic immediately. The team leader and the medical staff rushed in to take charge of the situation. Liam asked what had happened, while the man they brought in gasped for breath. He stammered that their shelter had been taken over, prompting the question, by whom? It wasn't the infected, but people. The man swallowed hard before continuing. They call themselves the cleaners, and they kill everyone they see to loot their supplies. Leo's expression darkened as he processed the name. The cleaners? How did they reach this area, and more importantly, did he actually know them? He had heard mentions of them before, a group of people who had completely lost their minds. They truly believed the apocalypse was a form of divine punishment. Their goal was to eliminate every single survivor they found. Pure madness, really. This world certainly has no shortage of lunatics, but how many of them are there? Lily asked the question, but the man didn't know. There were at least 50, all heavily armed. 50 madmen armed to the teeth, while our group had only 30 people and very few weapons. Leo then asked the most critical question. Did they know the survivors would flee here? The man hesitated for a moment before admitting that they might very well know. The air seemed to freeze in that moment. Should they gather everyone together? Leo gave the order to prepare for battle with firm resolve, but it was already too late. In the distance, the roar of engines began to echo. They're here, the sentry screamed. Looking through the gaps in the wall, we see a truly desperate scene unfolding. There were a dozen modified vehicles approaching the compound. Every single occupant was dressed in a chilling black uniform. Leo shouted for all the elderly, women, and children to get to the basement immediately. He ordered anyone who could hold a weapon to get up on the wall. He quickly grabbed Lily and led her toward the basement, but she stopped to ask about him. He told her he had to help, even though they both knew it was far too dangerous. He told her to obey him, giving her a gentle push to make her move quickly. Lily bit her lip, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears as she looked at him. She told him to be careful before he watched her disappear into the basement. Leo grabbed a rifle and climbed the wall just as the enemy caravan halted at the gate. A man wearing a skull mask climbed onto a car roof and raised a loudspeaker. He shouted for everyone inside to listen, claiming they had been chosen by heaven. He told them to accept their evolution, the twisted logic of a madman, clearly. Chris cursed under his breath, telling them exactly where they could go. The masked man called them stubborn and ignorant, mere dwellers of the earth. He threatened to send them all to hell, and with that, the battle began. Bullets rained down like hail as Leo huddled behind cover, feeling the world tremble. The air was thick with danger, so he peeked out and fired several random shots. He retreated quickly, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. This was his first true battle, not against the infected, but against living people. Suddenly someone screamed a warning about a grenade, followed by a deafening boom. The explosion erupted nearby, sending jagged shrapnel flying in every direction. A guard fell with a cry, but unfortunately, the medics were all in the basement. And here we see the situation becoming increasingly desperate for our group. The suppressive fire from the bandits was simply too intense to withstand. They seemed indifferent to the cost, focused only on tearing down the main gate. They wouldn't be able to hold out for long, as the main gate groaned and wobbled under the heavy machine gun fire. Leo shouted for everyone to prepare to retreat toward the station. Just then, we see Will come running toward him. He announced he was going to block the gate, prompting Leo to ask if he had completely lost his mind. Leo tried to hold him back, but Will insisted that someone had to do it. Will pulled himself free, reminding Leo that as a delivery driver, he was faster than anyone. Before Leo could even react, the young man had already lunged outside. Carrying a box of grenades, Will ran behind the main gate and began stuffing them through the narrow gap. Bullets impacted all around him, kicking up thick clouds of dust in a terrifying display. Leo screamed for him to come back, but Will simply turned and gave him a wide, bright smile. Then, with calm deliberation, he pulled the pins on every single grenade. A massive explosion followed, and in an instant, the main gate and Will were both gone. However, the blast was powerful enough to overturn the 2 lead vehicles of the enemy caravan. Leo stood there paralyzed. That smiling, cheerful guy had vanished just like that. A voice snapped him out of it, telling him not to just stand there and to keep firing. It was Mike, his eyes red with fury and grief as he roared the command. Leo squeezed the trigger, his heart set on avenging Will's sacrifice. But there were simply too many zombies, and they began pouring through the breach created by the explosion. The order was given to retreat to the workshop, and our group fought desperately as they fell back. Several more fell, including Jake, who stayed behind to cover the retreat. To be honest, it was a grim scene. Jake had been hit in the leg, and he pleaded with the others to leave him behind and save themselves. He said it with conviction, but no one abandoned him. 2 men grabbed him and kept running. We see the group retreat to the main workshop, where they blocked the door with everything they could find. Leo urgently asked where the entrance to the basement was located. It's in the back, Chris replied, while clutching his wounded shoulder in pain. Luke insisted they protect the people in the basement and volunteered to guard the back door. Leo decided to go with him, followed closely by several others from the group. Upon reaching the back door, they found several zombies already trying to force their way inside. They opened fire immediately, and after a brief exchange, the zombies were temporarily driven back. But their ammunition was running dangerously low, leading Leo to ask how many bullets were left. Less than 100, came the grim reply. Just as they felt lost, the walkie-talkie crackled to life. It was Chris, warning them that the front door couldn't hold out much longer. He told them to prepare to break the siege, though the idea of a breakout seemed nearly impossible. Leo wondered where they could even go, since the enemies were surrounding them on all sides. Suddenly, Luke revealed that the basement actually had a secret passage. He explained it led to the woods behind them, prompting the others to ask how he knew that. I saw it earlier, Luke replied, while quickly swapping out his empty magazine. He told Leo to take the people from the basement through the passage while they stayed behind. Leo protested, knowing that staying to cover the retreat was a certain death sentence. It's better than everyone dying, Luke said, looking Leo directly in the eye with a heavy silence. Luke reminded him of his own words. As long as there is life, there is hope. There was no time left for an argument, so Leo turned and ran toward the basement. When he found Sophie and Lee, she immediately threw her arms around him in relief. He told them to move quickly toward the passage, the only way out. It turned out Luke was right. The basement did indeed have a secret tunnel. He ordered everyone to follow him, a small group of 15 elders, women, and children. The passage was incredibly narrow, forcing them to walk hunched over to move forward. It was dark, damp, and terrifying, while the sound of intense gunfire echoed from behind. Explosions followed, and he couldn't help but wonder how Luke and the others were holding up. After walking for about 10 minutes, they finally saw a glimmer of light ahead. The exit led directly into the woods, and he urged them to run without looking back. They sprinted through the forest at full speed, while behind them, back at the factory, the sky was stained with the glow of flames. They ran until their lungs burned. When they finally stopped to take a head count, only 15 people remained. That was all that was left of the outpost, which had once been home to over 30. Sophie asked in a low, trembling voice what had happened to Luke and the others. Leo could only lower his head. They had stayed to protect the group, and now they were gone. Someone asked what they should do next, and Leo looked at the weary group around him. Looking at the elders and children, he felt a profound sense of inner confusion and weight. Sam was dead. Luke was dead. To be honest, the cost of survival felt almost too high. Even Wayne was gone now, and Leo realized that he had suddenly become the group's only pillar of support. As they moved through the dark, we see a faint light flickering in the distance, a steady, warm glow. It was a campfire, and Leo whispered for everyone to be careful as they approached it with stealthy steps. Several figures were sitting around the flames, their silhouettes appearing calm and composed in the night. They didn't look like zombies at all. In fact, they seemed to be talking and laughing quite cheerfully. To be honest, the sight was a relief, especially since they were clearly wearing military uniforms. Believing they were finally safe, Leo was just about to step out from the shadows and call for help. But Sophie stopped him suddenly, pointing toward the armbands those men were wearing. Those weren't the markings of the regular army. They were clever, crude fakes. At that exact moment, one of the soldiers stood up and headed toward the woods to relieve himself. As the man passed through the firelight, Leo finally caught a clear glimpse of his face. It was a zombie. They had actually changed into human clothes to blend in. They were waiting there, hoping that survivors like our group would walk straight into their trap. Leo frantically signaled for everyone to retreat, but the monsters were far too quick to react. It was already too late. A voice cried out that someone was there, and then another followed. A zombie let out a piercing shriek, and once again, they were running for their lives. The sound of pursuing footsteps echoed behind them, and suddenly, Sophie tripped and fell hard. She had badly twisted her ankle, and Leo knew he couldn't leave her behind. She told him to go on without her, but he simply hoisted her onto his back and kept running, with her weight slowing him down. However, he realized the creatures would reach them very soon. At that very moment, we see bright headlights cutting through the darkness ahead of us. They are genuine military vehicles, complete with heavy machine guns mounted on top. An officer steps out of the lead car and asks if they are all right. This time, they are the real deal. The armbands, the gear, and their bearing are all authentic. Leo gasps out that they are survivors, struggling to catch his breath. The officer nods firmly and orders everyone to get into the vehicle immediately. He promises to take them to a safe place, though Leo wonders if such a place even exists. Is there really anywhere safe left? The military convoy races off into the night. Leo holds Sophie in his arms, noticing that her foot has become terribly swollen. A combat medic provides basic first aid and gives her an injection for the pain. Leo asks the officer where exactly they are headed. The officer simply replies that they are going to the capital. It is there that the largest survivor base in the region has been established. To the capital, after all their wandering, it seems they are finally going back. Leo asks if the city is truly safe, and the officer admits it is only relatively so. It is at least better than anywhere else, though that answer provides very little comfort. When asked about the situation across the country, the officer sighs and says it isn't good, but they are working hard to control it, knowing that hope is often more important than the truth. The convoy is made up of 3 sturdy military vehicles traveling in formation. Inside, the space is cramped and crowded with other exhausted survivors. We see they aren't alone. Some survivors cry softly, while others simply stare into the distance with hollow eyes. Every person here has their own story, and every single one of them has lost something precious. Sophie eventually falls asleep, leaning her head against Leo's shoulder, completely exhausted by the journey. As he watches her sleep, Leo feels a complex swirl of emotions he can't quite name. In just a few short days, they have endured more together than most people do in a lifetime. They went from being total strangers to depending on one another for their very survival. The pressure of the unknown has a way of compressing everything, including human feelings. The officer announces that they are almost there, breaking the heavy silence of the cabin. Looking through the small window, we see the dark silhouette of the capital appearing on the horizon. And then, there are lights, so many lights, shining like a beacon of hope in the dark. The convoy pulls up to a massive checkpoint where the security is far stricter than anything they've seen. In addition to the usual physical searches, the soldiers are using several high-tech scanners. The officer explains that this is the latest detection equipment available to the military. It is designed to detect the infection even while it is still in its incubation period. After passing the inspection, they are taken toward a sprawling complex of massive buildings. This area used to be the Olympic Village, but now it serves as the primary survivor base. The base is enormous, and for the first time in a long time, we see people walking the streets. There are crowds everywhere, yet a sense of order remains, with soldiers patrolling and workers distributing supplies. We see medical outposts, and even schools, signs that life is trying to find a way back. Civilization still endures here, as the officer points them toward a building to begin their registration. The officer explains they will be assigned housing, and if they need anything, they should look for the staff. Leo offers his thanks, but the man simply replies that protecting the people is his duty, a noble sentiment, which he delivers calmly before disappearing into the building. As Leo watches him walk away, he feels his eyes grow damp with unexpected emotion. After witnessing so much human cruelty, such simple, steady perseverance feels especially precious. We see a long line stretching out inside the registration office. The workers are efficient professionals. Leo provides his details, 28 years old. When asked about missing relatives, he recites the names of his parents. Deep down, he knows the hope is minimal, but he does it just in case. Then it is Sophie's turn. She is 26 years old. When the worker asks for her information, she provides the name of her boyfriend. The worker's expression doesn't flicker for a second. He is clearly used to these tragic stories. He asks if they are from the same group, and Leo and Sophie share a quick look. Leo repeats his age and the fact that his family is missing. He reports his parents' names again, clinging to that slim hope, while Sophie waits her turn. She confirms she is 26, and once again, she mentions her boyfriend's name. The staff member remains stoic, as this is a routine he has performed 1,000 times. He asks if they are a couple, and Leo and Sophie exchange another silent glance. They agree, and the worker notes that they can be assigned to a family room. The employee checks the box on the form, and just like that, their new life begins. Building B7, room 512. Here are your keys, the worker says, handing them over. A family room. Leo and Sophie take the keys in a heavy, thoughtful silence. The room itself isn't large, but it is remarkably clean and furnished with 2 beds. There is a simple table and a few basic necessities waiting for them. From the window, we see a clear view of the base's central plaza. It is better than he imagined, and Sophie quietly agrees as silence falls between them again. They both start to speak at the same time, before Leo tells her to go first. After another pause, he decides to get some water and reaches for the pitcher. Leo, she says, calling his name softly. Thank you. He tries to say it isn't necessary, but she interrupts him before he can finish. She thanks him for the entire journey and for never once abandoning her. He returns to her side and sits down, realizing he has something to say as well. He thanks her for making him feel that, even in this apocalypse, life still has meaning. He can still feel warmth. She looks at him with an unreadable emotion in her eyes. Then she kisses him, a gesture as soft and brief as a butterfly landing on a petal. She blushes and begins to apologize, but he quickly takes her hand to stop her. He tells her there is no need for apologies, and this time, he takes the initiative. In this mad world, we all need something to lean on, don't we? They both need to confirm they are still alive and capable of feeling something beautiful. Outside, night falls, and the lights of the base flicker on like distant, hopeful stars. Do you think this world will ever be okay again? Sophie asked, leaning back into his arms. Yes, Leo replied, stroking her hair. He told himself it was true, and this time, he meant it. As long as there are people, there is hope, he said, though she remained silent. She simply called for the authorities, and on the following day, they began a new life. The base assigned work to everyone, and since Leo knew how to drive, he joined the transport team. Sophie, meanwhile, continued her work in the medical wing. The next morning, we see them heading to the dining hall together. Even though it was just simple porridge and rolls, being able to sit at a clean table and eat normally Well, that was pure happiness. Are you heading out today? She asked. Leo nodded, explaining he had to collect supplies from the airport. Be careful, she warned. Don't worry, he replied, playfully pinching her cheek. I'll see you tonight. The transport team's task wasn't easy, but it was relatively safe. They had an armed escort, and the route had already been cleared of obstacles. Occasionally they encountered scattered infected, but they no longer posed a serious threat. More often than not, Leo found himself staring out at the city. He watched the ruined skyline from the window, a city that had once been so prosperous. He saw people growing vegetables on rooftops, cleaning streets, and repairing power lines. Human resilience, it seems, truly surpasses all imagination. When he returned to the base that evening, Sophie had already prepared dinner. Using the base's rationed ingredients, she had made a simple meal of egg and tomato noodles. They were very simple noodles, yet as he ate them, he felt a wave of happiness that almost moved him to tears. Is it good? She asked. He said it was, but she caught him in the lie. She hadn't used any salt. It was then he realized that, in his state, he hadn't even noticed the lack of flavor. The meal was tasteless, to be honest, but they simply looked at each other and smiled. Even in the middle of an apocalypse, we see that they were still capable of sharing a moment like this. As the days passed, the base became more established and self-sufficient. They now had working generators, water purification systems, and even small farms. There was even a school where the children could finally return to their lessons. And although the world outside those walls remained as dangerous as ever, life inside was slowly beginning to feel like something resembling normal again. One day, some incredible news came crackling through the radio speakers. Scientists had successfully developed an antibody and were already starting clinical trials. The entire base erupted in pure euphoria, with people embracing and weeping with joy. Everyone understood exactly what this antibody represented for their future. It was the start of a counterattack, the first real sign that humanity might actually survive. That evening, the base organized a small celebration to mark the occasion. Around a bonfire, Sophie began to dance, and for a moment, everyone forgot their shared pain. There was loud laughter everywhere. Shall we dance? Leo asked, reaching out his hand to Sophie. She admitted she didn't know how, and he confessed he didn't either. They began to sway clumsily, constantly stepping on each other's toes. To be fair, neither of them had any rhythm at all. They swayed clumsily, constantly stepping on each other's toes. But really, what did that matter? To be able to dance with the person you love by an apocalyptic bonfire is the greatest happiness. Leo, she whispered, I love you. He was stunned. It was the first time she had said those 3 words, and he told her he loved her too. And so, amidst the cheers of the crowd, they shared a kiss. Their mouths tasted like disinfectant, to be honest, but it was the taste of being alive. It was the taste of hope. 6 months later, the antibody was successfully developed. Mass vaccinations began, and the number of infected people started to drop drastically. Our story then shifts to the military, who finally began to reclaim lost territory. City after city was cleared of the threat and slowly rebuilt. On the radio, every day seemed to bring a new piece of good news. The Shanghai base was established, and communications were finally restored in Guangzhou. The airport in Chengdu reopened as the world slowly began to recover. Although there was still a long way to go and many difficulties ahead, they could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. A year later, Leo and Sophie were married in the base's small church. There was no luxurious wedding dress or opulent banquet in that newly built chapel. Just simple vows and the sincere blessings of those who had survived alongside them. In prosperity and adversity, in health and in sickness, he promised to love and protect her, until death parted them. As he spoke those vows, he remembered every step of their long journey. Their first meeting on the subway, their reliance on each other during the escape, and the love they found at the base. The apocalypse hadn't torn them apart. On the contrary, it had taught them to value each other more than ever. He assured her she could finally be at peace, as the crowd erupted into heartfelt applause around them. He kissed his new wife, and this time there was no taste of disinfectant, only the sweet flavor of happiness. After the wedding, we see them return to their modest little cabin to begin their life together. On the wall hung a weathered map, marked with all the distant places they still dreamed of visiting. He promised her that once the world fully recovered, they would set out and travel the globe. Sophie simply smiled and agreed, telling him she would go anywhere as long as it was with him. She mentioned wanting to see the ocean, and he promised that, one day, they would do just that. Outside their window, the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the recovering world. But this wasn't the sunset of an ending. It was the quiet dusk that precedes a brand new day. Leo took Sophie's hand and looked out at the busy streets of the base below. We see people coming and going, some chatting and laughing, while others simply enjoyed a peaceful stroll. Someone was even walking their dog, as if the apocalypse had been nothing more than a bad dream. But deep down, everyone knew the truth of what had happened and what they had endured. They remembered the people lost, the terrifying memories, and those long moments of absolute despair. Those scars remained, but because they had survived the darkness, they valued the light all the more. Precisely because they had stood so close to death, they found themselves truly in love with life. Sophie softly asked him what he was thinking about, wondering what he found most beautiful about being alive. He gave his answer, and she smiled, agreeing that yes, it truly was a wonderful thing to be alive. As night finally fell, the lights of the base flickered on, one by one, like stars against the dark. And so, in this brave new world, we see that they will simply continue to live. They would move forward with hope and with love, forever.